I thought I was just there to fix a broken fence, but the way her eyes lingered on me told a different story, one about repairing something far deeper than wood and nails. I didn't expect much that afternoon. Just a quiet job, a few hours of labor, and then back to my own life. The old wooden fence in her garden had been leaning for weeks, and I'd promised to come by and help straighten it. It was simple work, tools in hand, sun overhead, the earthy scent of damp soil rising each time I pressed a post into the ground. But then I felt it, the undeniable awareness of someone watching. At first, I thought it was just the usual prickling that comes from being outside in an open space. Yet when I straightened my back and looked toward the house, there she was. She stood on the porch, leaning lightly against the railing, a glass of something cold in her hand. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes carried a quiet intensity, like she was studying more than just what I was doing. She wasn't a stranger to me. I'd seen her around, known her in passing as the aunt who always seemed steady, composed, a little reserved. But this was the first time I truly noticed her. Her hair shifted gently in the warm breeze, and with a small, almost unthinking motion, she tucked a strand behind her ear. It was such a simple gesture, yet I felt the weight of it, like she was aware that I was watching her back now. I tried to focus on the work. Hammer, nails, the scrape of wood against wood, but my attention kept drifting. The sound of her sipping from the glass, the subtle tilt of her head, the way her lips curved into something not quite a smile, but not disinterest either. There was a steadiness in her presence, as though she had all the time in the world to stand there and simply look. And for the first time that day, the fence didn't feel like the real thing I was repairing. My heartbeat picked up in quiet rebellion, and I wondered if she could see it in the way my hands hesitated on the tools. When our eyes met, I expected her to look away quickly, the way most people do when caught watching. But she didn't. Her gaze lingered, unflinching, and in that pause I felt a kind of connection that words would have only broken. I gave a small nod, just enough to acknowledge her, and she responded with the faintest curve of her lips, like a secret she wasn't ready to share. That small exchange left me unsettled in the best way. The garden around me suddenly felt alive in detail, the bees hovering lazily over the lavender, the creak of the wood as I adjusted it, the warmth of the sun on my shoulders. But all of it paled compared to the awareness that she was still there, watching, waiting. I bent back to the fence, telling myself to focus, but the truth had already settled in. This wasn't going to be just another ordinary afternoon. Something had shifted the moment her eyes lingered on mine. The sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, painting the garden in a gentle wash of gold. I set down my tools, wiped the sweat from my brow, and noticed her stepping down from the porch, glass in hand, offering it toward me. "You must be thirsty," she said, her voice soft but steady, carrying a warmth that made the simple gesture feel almost intimate. I accepted it, and our fingers brushed briefly. A fleeting contact, but enough to send a shiver up my arm. She didn't pull away, only smiled faintly, as if she were testing the waters of our new, unspoken familiarity. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, subtle and floral, mingling with the earthy smells of the garden. It was grounding and unsettling at the same time. We started talking. At first, the conversation hovered on the mundane. The weather, the stubborn fence, her niece's garden flowers. But gradually, her words began to carry a deeper undercurrent. She spoke about the house, about its age and the quirks that made it feel alive, almost as if it had personality. Then, almost casually, she mentioned how she had taken care of it for years, maintaining a sense of order and balance, while life seemed to move around her unpredictably. There was a pause, and in that silence, I realized she wasn't just filling space with polite chatter. She was giving me a glimpse of something real, the quieter, softer parts of herself that weren't always visible to the world. I listened closely, and she noticed. Her eyes met mine, and there was a fleeting flicker of vulnerability, like she was weighing whether I could understand it. I nodded slowly, not out of pretense but out of genuine acknowledgement. That small recognition seemed to relax her shoulders, just slightly, allowing her guard to drop in tiny increments. When she handed me another sip of iced tea, our fingers met again. This time, the contact lingered just a moment longer. It was a light brush, nothing overt, but it carried a warmth, a subtle invitation. I felt it trail up my arm, a quiet echo that made me acutely aware of the space between us and the growing tension within it. The sun slanted lower, casting long shadows across the garden. The ordinary sounds, birds calling, the wind rustling leaves, seemed softer somehow, like the world had slowed down around us. I noticed her studying the way I worked, her gaze neither judgmental nor critical, but attentive in a way that made me feel both exposed and seen. For the first time that day, I realized this wasn't just a job. The afternoon had shifted from simple manual labor to something charged with unspoken meaning. There was a rhythm developing between us, a quiet harmony in our gestures and silences. By the time the sun kissed the horizon, I knew something had begun. Subtle, fragile, yet undeniable. I didn't know where it would lead, but in that fleeting contact, in the depth of her gaze, I felt the first stirring of a connection that might just change everything. Evening had settled over the garden, softening everything in a honeyed glow. Shadows stretched across the lawn, and the air had cooled, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier. I was tidying up my tools, my hands sticky with sap and dirt, when I noticed her leaning against the porch railing again. This time, she didn't offer a drink or a word of small talk. She simply watched, her eyes tracing my movements with a quiet attentiveness that made every gesture feel deliberate, charged. I straightened and looked at her, meeting her gaze fully. There was something different now, a subtle weight behind her calm exterior, a pause in her usual composure. She sighed lightly, a sound almost lost in the rustle of leaves, and for a moment, it was as if the air between us had thickened, heavy with unspoken truths. "It's funny," she began, her voice low and almost hesitant. "I've been fixing things around here for years. The house, the garden, even myself in a way. But some things feel like they're beyond repair." I froze, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way she said them, with quiet vulnerability, and yet a bravery that startled me. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't seeking pity. It was a confession disguised in ordinary conversation, like she was letting me peek into a part of her life that most people never see. I stepped closer, unsure of how to respond, and she gave me a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was gentle, tinged with a bittersweet note, and I felt a pang of something unnameable in my chest. She looked at me in a way that made the world shrink to just the space we occupied, like she was testing whether I could be trusted to notice the subtleties, the cracks, and the quiet strength hiding beneath her calm exterior. There was a pause. Her fingers drifted to the railing, curling around it lightly, almost absent-mindedly. When she spoke again, it was quieter still, almost a whisper. "I've been trying to keep everything together on my own, but sometimes it feels like I've been holding pieces of myself that don't quite fit anymore." I didn't know what to say. Words felt clumsy here. Instead, I simply reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. The movement was small, almost insignificant, yet it carried a weight far beyond its size. She didn't pull back. Her eyes softened, her shoulders sagged slightly, and I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her in a way that made me acutely aware of the closeness between us. In that moment, the ordinary garden around us, the humming of insects, the faint scent of evening flowers, the warmth of fading sunlight became secondary. The real focus was the quiet exchange of trust, the unspoken understanding that something delicate, something fragile, had begun to form between us. I realized then that this afternoon wasn't just about repairing a fence. It was about glimpsing her, fully, honestly, and feeling the first stirrings of a connection that promised to go far deeper than anything either of us had anticipated. The rain came softly at first, just a drizzle, then heavier, drumming gently against the roof and leaves. The garden transformed under the gray sky. The flowers glistened with droplets. The wooden fence glowed dark and rich with moisture, and the earthy scent of wet soil filled the air. I had paused mid-task, wiping my hands on a rag, when she appeared at the door, holding a small towel. "You should stay inside until it lets up," she said, her voice calm but layered with an almost imperceptible warmth. She stepped aside, gesturing to the living room. Hesitating only a moment, I followed. The soft carpet under my boots and the muted light from the lamps created an immediate sense of intimacy, as if the outside world had paused for us alone. We settled on the sofa, a respectful distance apart at first, but the air between us was charged, thick with unspoken awareness. The rain's steady rhythm outside became the backdrop for our growing closeness, like a private soundtrack to an unfolding connection. She tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear, and I noticed the faint scent of rain mixing with her perfume. Floral, understated, grounding. Her eyes kept finding mine, and I could feel the magnetic pull that seemed to draw us closer, even as words remained sparse. We spoke about trivial things at first, the unpredictability of the weather, the stubbornness of the fence. Yet every sentence carried a subtle weight. Each glance, each slight shift in posture, became a language of its own. As she leaned back into the sofa, her knee brushed mine. The contact was almost accidental, yet it made the pulse in my chest spike. Neither of us moved away. Instead, we lingered in the closeness, aware of it but allowing it to grow naturally, deliberately. Her shoulders relaxed slightly against mine, and I felt a faint heat radiating from her, comforting and electrifying at the same time. There was a quiet tension in the air, not desperate or urgent, but deliberate. A slow, simmering awareness that both of us recognized but neither named. I noticed the way her hand hovered near mine on the armrest, as if contemplating a gesture she hadn't yet dared. My own fingers itched to bridge the space, to let her know without words that I saw her, that I was present for her in this suspended moment. She spoke then, softly, about trivialities again. The garden, the house, life's little quirks. Yet her voice carried an intimacy that cut through the noise of my thoughts. Every sentence seemed layered, a gentle invitation to step closer, to cross the invisible boundary between casual proximity and something more. The rain began to ease, leaving a soft silver sheen on the windows. But we didn't move. Our shared silence, punctuated by the faint patter of water, had become enough. It was a tension that spoke louder than words, a quiet acknowledgement that the connection between us had grown into something profound, something that demanded patience, attention, and the courage to explore slowly. In that quiet room, the world outside faded. The rain, the garden, the fading light, all of it receded into the background, leaving only the unspoken, electric closeness between us. For the first time that evening, I felt the delicate thrill of something just beginning, something that neither time nor propriety could diminish, and yet demanded every ounce of our careful restraint. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the garden shimmered under the dim evening light. The air smelled of wet earth and faint jasmine from the hedges near the porch. I was gathering my tools, preparing to leave, when she appeared at the door. There was a hesitation in her step that immediately caught my attention, a rare vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I'm glad you stayed," she said, voice low, almost fragile. She didn't step fully into the garden, but she leaned on the doorframe, the faintest curve of a smile tugging at her lips. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands as she folded them lightly in front of her, a gesture that somehow made her seem both strong and delicate at the same time. I set down the toolbox, sensing that whatever she was about to say mattered more than the work we'd been doing all afternoon. She glanced down at her feet, then back up, meeting my eyes with a quiet steadiness. "There's something I need to ask," she murmured. Her tone carried the weight of unspoken emotion, as if she had been rehearsing the words in her mind for days. I nodded slowly, encouraging her without pressing, aware that this was a delicate moment. "Anything," I said simply. She inhaled, her shoulders straightening slightly, and stepped closer. The space between us shrank subtly, enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, and the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the dampness of the evening air. "It's not just the house," she said carefully. "I've been holding things together on my own for a long time, but some pieces of me, they've been broken for longer than I realized. I was wondering if Maybe you could help me fix something deeper. The words hung in the air, tender and fragile. I felt the weight of her trust pressing softly against me, an intimate plea that went far beyond mere repair work. Her hand lifted slightly, hovering near my forearm, and I saw the faintest tremor in her fingers. I reached out instinctively, letting my hand brush hers. A light, grounding touch that spoke of understanding without needing to say a word. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand lingered, just enough for me to feel the subtle warmth and the unspoken invitation in the gentle pressure. My heart thudded in my chest, but it wasn't just desire. It was the gravity of her vulnerability, the quiet courage it took to ask for something so personal. I swallowed and gave her a reassuring nod. "I'll stay," I said softly. "Whatever you need." There was no hesitation in my voice. I wanted her to feel safe, to know that her trust was well placed. Her lips curved into a small, relieved smile, and I noticed the tension in her body finally ease. She exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for years, and I could sense the quiet gratitude radiating from her. The house, the garden, even the fading drizzle outside, all faded into insignificance. The real moment, the real connection was right here in the space between us. We lingered there for a long moment, letting the gravity of what had just passed settle. Her hand slowly withdrew, but the warmth remained, etched into the memory of our touch. Something fundamental had shifted, a subtle, powerful acknowledgement that our bond was no longer just fleeting attraction, but something deeper, quietly, beautifully significant. After her quiet request, the world seemed to shift in subtle, profound ways. I stayed, gathering only the courage I could muster, and we returned to the living room. The soft glow of the lamps cast gentle shadows across the walls, highlighting the warmth in her eyes and the faint blush in her cheeks. There was a new intimacy in the air, a sense that the ordinary rules of distance and polite restraint no longer fully applied. She sank onto the sofa with a sigh that sounded like relief, and I hesitated before sitting beside her. Our knees brushed lightly, a tentative contact, and I felt my pulse quicken. She didn't flinch, only shifted slightly closer, as if testing the boundaries of this closeness. The silence between us was comfortable, almost deliberate, broken only by the occasional distant sound of wind rustling leaves outside. We didn't speak at first. Words felt unnecessary, even intrusive. Instead, I noticed the quiet details. The way her hair fell across her shoulder, catching the soft light. The subtle rise and fall of her chest with each breath. The warmth radiating from her as she leaned gently toward me. Every movement was understated, but together they formed a language of trust and mutual recognition. Her hand brushed against mine accidentally, or maybe not, and I let it linger, resting over hers with a light pressure that spoke more than words ever could. I could feel the small, steady rhythm of her pulse beneath my palm, and it struck me how much this simple, unassuming touch carried. Reassurance, desire, and vulnerability all at once. She shifted slightly, leaning her cheek against my chest. The moment was intimate but not rushed. I could feel the quiet strength in her surrender, the way she allowed herself to be close without fear, without pretense. Her warmth seeped into me, grounding me, and I instinctively wrapped my arm around her shoulders, holding her gently but securely. The world outside faded. The rain's soft tapping on the roof, the dim light filtering through the curtains, the scent of wet earth lingering in the air. All of it receded until nothing existed beyond this shared space between us. We spoke little, our conversation reduced to whispers, sighs, and the gentle rhythm of breathing. The distance between us diminished with each passing moment, replaced by a closeness that felt inevitable. I noticed the subtle relaxation in her body, the way she let herself be supported, both physically and emotionally, and it stirred something profound in me. Time seemed suspended, marked only by the quiet sounds of the room. The faint creak of the sofa cushions, the rustle of her hair against my chest, the soft exhale she gave when she leaned just a fraction closer. There was no need to rush, no need to define this moment with words. It was enough that we were here, together, a fragile, perfect equilibrium of trust, warmth, and burgeoning intimacy. And in that quiet, electric closeness, I realized the threshold we had crossed was more than physical proximity. It was the beginning of something deeper, a connection that was tender, respectful, and undeniably powerful, held in place by patience, awareness, and the courage to let ourselves be truly seen. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving the garden glistening under the pale light of the rising moon. Drops clung to petals and leaves, reflecting the soft glow, while the scent of wet earth and faint jasmine lingered in the cool night air. Inside, the house felt warm and still, the gentle quiet of the evening wrapping around us like a protective cocoon. She walked me to the door, the subtle hesitancy in her step still present, but tempered by a newfound calm. She didn't rush me, nor did I feel the need to leave hastily. The air between us carried the weight of what had shifted over the past hours, the quiet closeness, the trust, and the intimacy we had cultivated together. When she turned to face me, there was a softness in her eyes that made my chest tighten. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost trembling, yet steady in its sincerity, "for staying, for helping me." Her hands were folded lightly in front of her, but they didn't tremble. They radiated warmth, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection we had formed. I stepped closer, drawn in by the subtle gravity of her presence. The space between us was charged, not with urgency, but with something far deeper. Understanding, recognition, and a fragile, beautiful desire that neither of us had fully named. I reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, letting my fingers linger near her cheek. The touch was gentle, respectful, yet it carried the weight of everything unsaid between us. Her lips curved into a small, relieved smile, and she tilted her head slightly, letting my hand rest near her face. In a quiet, almost imperceptible motion, she leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. The warmth of her lips against my skin was fleeting, yet it left an impression that would linger far longer than the moment itself. It was gratitude, affection, and the promise of something more, all rolled into one delicate gesture. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking, letting the moonlight and the gentle silence carry the weight of our emotions. The garden, the house, the cool night air, all of it faded into the background, leaving only the presence of each other. The barriers, hesitations, and doubts that had lingered between us melted quietly, replaced by a calm certainty. Something meaningful had begun, and it was ours to nurture carefully. Finally, she stepped back slightly, her hand brushing lightly against mine as if to say, "We're both here, and this is real." I nodded, words unnecessary, because the connection we shared was already deeply understood. As I walked down the path toward the street, I felt her gaze following me. It wasn't longing, exactly, but a quiet affirmation. A recognition that the bond we had formed was not fleeting, not casual, but something lasting and profound. And in that moment, I understood that this story, our story, had reached its first gentle resolution. The night was cool, the garden glimmered under the moonlight, and somewhere in the quiet stillness of the evening, I carried with me the knowledge that something deeper had been fixed, nurtured, and awakened. Something tender, patient, and beautifully human. And I knew it would stay with both of us, quietly, steadily, and unmistakably real. If this story of quiet longing and unexpected connections touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss more slow-burn romances just like this. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if someone asked you to fix something deeper?